Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are so pleased to partner with DA Navoti and We the Indigenous to bring this reading to you as part of our Clarion West Summer and the last event of the Write-a-thon. My name's Jay Steinbacher. I'm the Clarion West Workshop Coordinator. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who's joined us for this year's Write-a-thon, making it our biggest and most engaged summer to date. We've already raised $19,153.47 in support of our writing programs. Thank you. Feel free to post in the chat if you're a Write-a-thon participant. For all of you watching tonight who are new to Clarion West, our mission is to support emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower their creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. And before we get to tonight's event, I'm here to announce the instructor lineup for the 2022 six-week workshop. So drum roll. Week 1 is Susan Palwick. Week 2, Fenderson Jelly Clark. Week 3, Fonda Lee. Week 4, Tobias Espakel. Week 5, editor Bill Campbell. And week 6, as a pair, Annalie Newitz and Charlie Jane Anders. I hope you're all as excited as we are. Applications for the 6-week workshop open December 1st, 2021 and close March 1st, 2022. It's our plan to hold the workshop in a fully ADA accessible location in person next summer. More information will be available, including contingency plans, on our website this fall. And now on to tonight's program. Created by DA Navoti, We the Indigenous debuted in Seattle, Washington, and is a virtual reading series showcasing the best of Indigenous literary talent. Joining us to introduce the program and readers tonight is DA Navoti. DA is a multidisciplinary storyteller and writer. His work has appeared in Homology Lit, Indian Country Today, Cloud Throat, and elsewhere. Thanks everyone for joining us, and welcome, DA.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jay, for that warm welcome. And thank you to Clarion West for partnering for this amazing event. First of all, I just want to congratulate Clarion West on those wonderful donation fundraising goals. I kind of wanted to do a wave with all of us virtually, but I don't know how that would work out. So I was just doing it in my head. And then quite a lineup for next summer. So that's really exciting. So for those folks listening, please support and tune into Clarion West. They're a great organization. But welcome, friends and family, to We the Indigenous, an evening celebrating Indigenous literary talent. And the theme is Worlds and Myths. Again, my name is DA Navoti, and I'm a member of the Gila River Indian community, a descendant of O'odham, Hopi, Zuni, and Yavapai Apache tribes. I do want to acknowledge that I am broadcasting from Duwamish territory, otherwise known as Seattle, Washington, and that I'm a guest on the traditional homes of all tribes and bands within Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this dialogue. So I just want to take this opportunity and also for you to, wherever you're tuning in from, to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. So a bit about the series. We the Indigenous is a virtual reading series showcasing the best of Indigenous literary talent. And the mission of this series is to elevate the Indigenous literary renaissance I believe that we are currently living through today. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to introduce this evening's readers momentarily. And as mentioned earlier, tonight's theme is Worlds and Myths, which can be interpreted as navigating historical worlds and hearing myths told by ancestors that we'll never know or ever meet in our lives. What's, I think, for me more mysterious is that there are multiple worlds Indigenous people occupy in the 21st century. There's a past we're obligated to, there's a present we're currently navigating, and of course, there's a future of uncertainty yet intrigue. I think similarly, mythology bleeds into our everyday lives, whether we are aware of it or not. I kind of still think about and reflect a lot about what happened during the year that must not be named, 2020, which seemed to be full of modern day heroes and villains and monsters, and of course, a plague. But our readers tonight invite us into their own worlds and myths. I'm just excited to just enter through the stories that they're going to share with us tonight. So what adventures do we have in store? Well, I'm not exactly sure. And to be quite honest, I say let's get on with it. Let's rock and roll. So we're really excited to introduce the first reader. That's going to be Sloan Liang, who is a cartoonist, artist, and writer of Hawaiian, Chinese, Mexican, Cherokee, Choctaw, and European ancestries. She's written and drawn the two beautiful acclaimed graphic novels, Prison Stalker and A Map to the Sun, and has short fiction credits with Fireside Magazine, Dark Matter Magazine, and Entropy Magazine. And she's currently living on Chinook land near what is known as Portland, Oregon. Everyone, please welcome Sloan Liang.
Hey, Walina, thank you for having me. This is really cool. I love this series and I'm stoked to be a part of it. Yeah, so I decided to read a portion of, or like a tiny introduction to my novella, which is a science fantasy story. It has giant robots, mech pilots, giant aliens, shape-shifting trickster planets, and a sort of fictional analog of indigenous cultures that I'm a part of. So you might see language or names that are kind of similar to like maybe Hawaiian or like Cherokee cultures. But yeah, and these characters are trying to survive through this techno-apocalyptic future that they found themselves in. So the excerpt I'm going to read from now is entitled With the Blade as Witness. And it's a prequel to a novel that's in the same universe that's out on submission. So hopefully I can get it into your hands soon. And yeah, a little content warning for robot gore and mentions of violence. Also, I'll be showing the text for this reading because I personally have auditory processing issues and it's difficult for me to keep up with reading. So yeah, so for people like me, I hope the text helps. Beneath the goddess's burning eye, in a cemetery of stone and rusted ruins, Vreya breathes through the wound. Her keeper's atrium has been pierced through by Prayer and Red's spear, spilling out the amnia that keeps her human body catatonic, but her mind awake, connected. The link between Vreya and her keeper, witness to glory, falters. The sensory filaments fused to the array of ports in her spine stiffen as the atrium leaks dry. Her vision fills with erratic prisms as her senses leap back and forth between her keeper's perception and her own. She shifts her small human body, and her keeper roughly mimics her, its massive armored frame creaking with effort as the wound saps it of energy. You're done, Vreya of Clarion, Prayer in Red says with your enormous keeper's voice, lifting their amnia-soaked spear to witness to glory's throat. The air slips into Witness to Glory's atrium, chilling Vreya's human body, a body she shouldn't be experiencing. Don't tell me when I'm done, Vreya says, but then stops when her voice comes out of her own throat, and not the mechanized hollow that comprises her keeper's vocal processes. That's what I thought. Prayer in Red withdraws her spear in a spinning flourish, anchoring it onto her back. The raucous cheers and coaching shouts of their respective tribes have devolved into a calcified silence. Prayer in Red regards Vreya, then says, with no little smugness, it was a fine fight, duelist. As her rival leaves, Vreya struggles to rise, to at least stand before her adversary. A metallic groan is all Witness to Glory can do, its healing processes negating her will. The sun sets before Witness to Glory's blood dries enough for Vreya's cousins to climb and extract her from the damaged atrium. They pry the armored plates apart, sealing her in an open... Excuse me. They pry the armored plates apart and disconnect the sensory filaments from her spine with a series of sucking pops. Awareness of her physical form ricochets back to her with a violence like birth. Her wet skin pebbles with the temperature drop, crippled leg throbbing with nerve damage. Her spine and the base of her skull burned from the chafed subdermal intrusions raw with sores. They raise Vreya out of her keeper, allowing her to briefly observe the violent breach of their biomechanical protector. It is an ugly gash, strategically placed but small. It would heal in a day or two if they let it rest and nourish itself on sunlight. At her word, they secure her to a stretcher and lower her down to the ground where her mother Iman waits in anguished silence. Not anguish for her daughter's pain, but for what she had just lost, the tribe of Clarion, an alliance with the Matawi tribe, a clan that would have shored up their defenses against their enemies. But now that privilege would go to Prayer and Red's tribe instead, and Vrea's clan would be left alone and vulnerable until another match was made. Tears stab at Vrea's eyes, but her mother says nothing, offers no soothing touch. The tribesmen carry her to a tent beside her keeper and leave her there alone to recover. Her mother does not enter after her. A sob rattles through her chest, forcing Vrea to breathe in deep. She smells of mortality, the dried atrial amnia, and her own sweat and saliva blending into a sweet, fleshy rot. Through muffled ears, Vrea hears her mother and the tribesmen murmuring outside, but their words bleed into each other unintelligibly, lamenting about her loss most likely, grieving their collapsed alliance. Triumph is temporary, but defeat, it seems, lasts forever. There are things that last longer than a duelist. There are few things that last longer than a duelist's reputation. Not even the land was as constant as a loser's shame. It is not like a scar. That implied there was a time when the wound didn't exist. No, every loss marked Vrea on a deeper level, in the foundation of her blood. When the other tribe members look at her and her defeats, they saw them as deformities, extending back to her womb days. She was always a failure, they say in Vrea's head. She was not born to this as her father was. A chorus of imagined disappointment fills in her mind as she falls into an exhausted sleep, her heart honing a blunt private bitterness into a sharper edge. That she was chosen to be her tribe's duelist is an honor, so why did it feel like a celestial sentence? Punishment for an offense she didn't commit. In the cold of her empty tent, Vrea drifts into a lightless dream. Black all around and soundless, the pointed finger of a goddess extends from the heavens like a comet, pressing down into the tar of her own failure. Who are you, the goddess asks, voice everywhere, nowhere. Vrea of Clarion, you know me. No, the goddess says in a timbre of starlight and sun flares. No one knows you, child. This is how Vrea's people tell the story of their beginning. Our home rests beneath an angry sun, a sweltering coral wound in the sky, the mischievous dancing quartet of moons. Through these four heavenly eyes, a goddess watches as our world dissolves and changes. It strips itself clean of its shape like a gale reshapes the face of a dune, cracks its chrysalis, and reemerges under its own will, strange and wholly disparate. Meadows and woodlands disappear within the span of a breath, replaced with karsts and sinkholes. Hills become caverns, coves become deserts. Castles spun of glass and liquid lightning rise and wilt. Machines of iron and tar bubble up and burst, all within the span of a generation or sometimes a breath. This is how we mark time. After the sacred topography left behind, after the effect of its presence, the season of ruby towers, the season of ravening, the season of shattered valleys. There are no records to piece together the mystery of these buildings and monuments, of the artifacts that manifest in the middle of an empty scrubland like honey without a hive. In the old tales, the land was not like this, not until Kwani's arrival. Kwani, shapeshifter, trickster, trapper. Kwani, mother of discord and turmoil. After a millennia of swimming out among the galaxies, sifting through clouds of cosmic dust with her teeth and feasting on subspace gems, Kwani playfully ruptured the orbit of her sister's favorite moons and spun a ring of planets around her smallest finger. Aralti, mother of inertia and peace, elder twin to Kwani, flinched at the chaos and caught her sibling up in her dark hands. She pressed Kwani down into the core of her favorite star to meditate on the superiority of infinite stasis, tangling up her boundless consciousness into the threads of chilled mantle and molten core. And for a moment, there was stillness, balance, harmony. Aralti smiled. But Kwani could not quiet her soul. Forged of frenzied cataclysm and annihilating change, her essence seeped out through the surface of the planet, and it thrashed, cried out like a newborn in the void-chilled emptiness. In the sky, Aralti watched Kwani, disappointed with her unyielding energy, but equally curious. Life began to take hold on Kwani's chaotic skin in spite of her inhospitable surface. That is where we were born, between chaos and order. We worship neither, but honor both. Below our feet, Kwani's world mutates tirelessly, ruling our tribe's every move with her childish whims, and above, Aralti peers at us with four careful eyes, our only guide across the temperamental terrain. This is where we are to die, amid the impasse between two unrelenting sisters warring with each other's nature. But thankfully, blessedly, the goddesses were not ignorant or unsympathetic of our place in their predicament. Both pitied our suffering, and so they gifted us a boon in the form of the keepers. Within the circle of their presence, a circle big enough for a tribe, the world would remain the same, a blessing of protection from Kwani's shifting. With this gift, peace would be in reach. We would only need to grasp it. A gift. To Vreya, it is nothing so kind. Neither goddess exists within the realms of malice or benevolence. Boon or gift, one thing is certain. The keepers extract a price, and she, along with the other duelists, are meant to pay it with bone and blood. They are the scales and the noose, the judge and the executioner, and a land poised to kill them. Kwani's capricious touch was merciless, morphing the land at whim. The tribes could not sow enmity so freely and hope to last in a world so nebulous. Extinction was the only conclusion to unchecked warfare. But they were human. Violence was in their blood. And so oaths were taken. The tribes alive on Kwani's world agreed to settle disputes through the judicial duels of keepers. Less blood would be shed, lives would be spared, and the outcomes of the duels would be respected. It was their one shared law and the only thing that kept thousands of small tribes alive. But they are human. Violence is in their blood. For the last 10 seasons, the tribe of Lucan had laid siege to any clan who did not ally with them. They would collect their victims' keepers and enslave those defeated. Dreams of judgment, the keeper of the Lucan reveled in conquest and duels to the death. Many of the keepers that stood against them ended up as heaps of chitinous scrap, their helms stuck to the end of pikes. Dreams of judgment would core out the keeper's atrium, shredding the duelist inside. Those that escaped the Lucan's wrath told others of the war tribe's ideals. They craved to have as many keepers as possible under their control in order to form an army that no single tribe could stand against. And once all the tribes were united under the single head of their power, they would build a city protected by the keepers, ruled by the Lucan. Vreya cannot picture the vastness of what a city means, of the myriad tribesmen clotted together into one place at one time, or the army of keepers walling them into their enforced empire. What Vreya can see is her mother's head held high, a stubborn set to her jaw as dreams of judgment poises a blade at her throat. What she can see is her mother unwilling to bend the knee. What she can see is her mother's head separating from her body. What she can see is all the names of her every weakness spelled out in blood spatter and bone. Thank you.
All right, let's give a round of applause to Sloan. I just love that. Great. We're going to go into a Q&A just briefly, and then we'll move on to our next reader, Daniel H. Wilson. But before I ask my question, Sloan, I just wanted to say thank you so much for making your text available for accessibility. I do think that's an important thing to consider in literary programs or in any program for that matter. So thank you. I had a question. In your intro, you had mentioned shape-shifting trickster planets or plants?
Planets?
What? Okay, that's what I thought I heard. I need to ask, where does that come from?
Where does that come from? I mean, I feel like on both sides of my, on the cultures on my parents' side, we both have a very strong connection and respect for the land. And I don't know, and I've always just been fascinated by like biological systems, both on like a singular organisms level, but also like on an ecosystem level. And also just the idea of like a natural, I don't know, psychic connections with like a hylozoicism, which is where everything is alive, even rocks and stuff. I'm not explaining this well, but basically just giving planets their own autonomy and sense of memory is something that's really interesting to me. I explore that a lot in Prism Stalker, which is like my sci-fi comic. And yeah, it's a theme that I always return to. Like, what does it mean when basically something that is completely part of your life that you're 100% dependent on has its own thoughts and feelings and intentions, and how do you basically, how do you communicate with that? How do you live around that sort of intent and autonomy? What does it mean when you fight against it? Yeah, those are just questions that I find fun to think about.
I love the idea of Mother Nature as a trickster, kind of wreaking havoc. Well, kind of because of us as humans, but I also love the idea of like Mother Nature on Mars or some other planets, and kind of what does that drama look like? Oh, okay. Anyway, you're just sparking these ideas and questions in my head. So, I'm glad you mentioned Prison Stalker, and because I have a question about world building, and I'm guessing a large portion of our audience are those that have been participating in Clarion West Write-a-thon and getting really immersed in their craft and just doing tons of writing. And so I have just a question about world building for you. And world building requires just tons of rules and regulations. You need to know kind of the norms of the world that you are creating. And so I'm just curious, do you ever get tangled up in those rules? And then, how so? If you do, then how do you kind of manage that type of workload?
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not a big world builder. I have like major concepts that I kind of build my story around, but I don't like press the, like, I'm not like, I don't have like a world building Bible. I like have a story that I want to tell, and like the trickster planet, the living planet, that's something that I really like. And so instead of building the idea of that first, I wrote a story around that concept. And then I built basically kind of like the scaffolding of the impact of that as I wrote the story, so that the world building only sprouts from the story itself. Because I actually do feel like if you world build first, it kind of like calcifies ideas for me. And I also don't believe that like our world is totally figured out as well. And I think ambiguity is a good thing to have. But especially in fiction, like I don't really care about like realism or like systems of magic that are like really consistent. And you're like, oh, okay, they did A, so we know B is going to happen. There's just like so many variables that in life itself that just doesn't interest me to have like clear cut kind of like structures or like world building rules in that sense.
I just love that. I'm sure a huge part of our audience, those writers in our audience, are just giving a sigh of relief that they don't have to write an encyclopedia for their world that's included in their story. So thanks for that relief. So that's good to hear that kind of that's your process, and it's definitely a more manageable process versus kind of what writers are told that you got to kind of get all the rules out of your world and know how things and people act and all that. But for you, it's like focus on the story, and then you kind of create that world around that. So that's awesome. I want to just move on to one more question, and that is, about a map to the sun, which was published by Macmillan, I think last year, 2020. And just for our audience, it's a story about 5 players in a struggling girls basketball team. And I wanted to read a brief review from the AV Club, who gave you a grade A review. And the review is, Leong has a great ear for teen dialogue, but her specialty is creating a mood that puts the reader inside the characters' heads. Color is Leong's most powerful tool, and she establishes bold color themes throughout the book that amplify the feeling on the page. And I definitely agree and see that throughout all of your work. And so, people say actions speak louder than words, silence is louder than words, but I'm also curious to know more from you about, is color louder than words, at least from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an underutilized element. Kind of across the board, but especially since we're talking about world building, color should always be a part of world building to me, especially if you're working in like a visual medium. Like the color of things represents like what we perceive as luxury, what we perceive as like gaudy or gauche, what we perceive as natural or unnatural. If you think of like the popular or classic sci-fi movies like THX 1138 or like Blade Runner, you have these like smoky silver, gray, blue palettes, and that's kind of reflective of the really industrial environment these characters are in, these like super futuristic, there's like no natural elements, there may be like neons, and so that all plays a part in how we perceive that world. And Prism Stalker and A Map to the Sun are both like really hyper colorful, and that's because I wanted to kind of tip the scales from like monochrome future to like hyper kaleidoscopic color future, because coming from like Hawaii, being surrounded by just like the brightest imaginable sunsets, like fauna, flora, that was always just like these glaring colors were always a part of my world. And the same with like Mexican architecture and clothing. And so I wanted to reflect that into the futures that I imagine. So when I'm drawing my sci-fi environments, they're always just like bursting with color. They're usually made of organic elements and not like hard right angles. And all of that is reflective of like the materials that the characters use in their world, what they value. And yeah, so that's kind of what I think about when I think of color. There's so much that color can do.
That's so good to hear that you're influenced by kind of the surroundings of which you grew up around. And I'm kind of just frankly jealous because I'm a desert boy from Arizona. I come from desert people. So my kind of cultural palette is brown and yellow, like dead yellow. So I'm quite jealous. So, but yeah, thanks so much for sharing. And then just one last question is that what's next for you in your artwork? Can you tell us about, or at least look forward to?
Yeah, totally. I think the project I'm most excited for that's also coming up the soonest is a Black Indigenous person of color illustrated horror anthology that I'm kickstarting beginning on August 1st, so this Sunday. And it's going to be 20 short stories and fiction with original illustrations to go with each one. So that's my little baby that I'm obsessed with right now. And then I also have a horror graphic novel coming out in October that I wrote and my friend Anna Bodrew, that's coming out with CKO. And then I have the sequel to Prism Stalker that'll be out next summer.
Yay, that's awesome. I'm sure everyone was waiting to hear that news. So, well, thanks again. And again, everyone give a round of applause to Sloan and just congratulations on all the great work. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right, y'all. So this is fantastic. Let's move on to our next reader. And I'm really excited to introduce this person as well. Daniel H. Wilson is a Cherokee citizen and author of the New York Times bestseller Robo-Apocalypse and its sequel Robo-Genesis, as well as How to Survive a Robot Uprising, The Clockwork Dynasty, and Amped. He earned a PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon University, as well as a master's degree in machine learning and robotics. Wow, I couldn't even pass one class of any of that. His latest novel is an authorized standalone sequel to Michael Crichton's classic, The Andromeda Strain, called The Andromeda Evolution. Wilson lives in Portland, Oregon. Everyone, please welcome Daniel H. Wilson.
Hey, okay, I'm not muted. All right, rock and roll. Thanks so much for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me to this. I've had extremely minimal social interaction for like a lot of us for the last couple of years. So this is or last year and a half. So this is great. I'm just going to read. So I had a short story collection come out called Guardian Angels and Other Monsters. And this is not my fanciest short story that I've written, my most, literary thing, but this is a really fun one. And it's short, so I can read the whole thing, I think. And what I'm messing around with, as you mentioned, I had this background as a roboticist. And when I was a roboticist, I used to think about, the natural world and how we think robots are unnatural, right? And you think about how an animal moves through, like a deer bounding through the woods, and you would think of that as graceful, right? We would call that graceful. And robots, so far are typically not graceful. And as I was watching robotics progress, I realized that a deer is really just a really good solution for locomoting through the woods, right? And the reason we think it's graceful is because it's a good solution. And when what we consider unnatural, artifacts start moving in those ways, they're going to start to acquire natural grace. And for me, it's interesting just to think about what's the difference between being well acclimated to a certain land, to a certain environment, and being natural there or being unnatural to it. And so that's what I'm playing with. And this is from the perspective of I grew up in a part of North Tulsa that overlaps with the Cherokee Nation. This is the Oklahoma guy. So, all right. It's called Garden of Life. The Garden of Life is complex. It's way beyond the ken of humankind. Textbooks say science has only stumbled upon around 10% of all existing species of plants and animals. There could be 10 to 100 million more. Critters, big and small, mostly small, are living and reproducing and dying as they have for eternity without a human being ever so much as laying eyes on them. It's a wide old world out there for a taxonomist. There are more living things hidden in the wilds than we'll ever know. Life likes to break free and spread, and what you can find will surprise you. I'm on what I call one of my long jaunts. A jaunt is supposed to be short by definition, but I enjoy the paradox. In fact, I enjoy it just about every weekend and holiday. Come Saturday morning, I pull on my hiking boots, tuck my pant legs into them, and lace them up tight. Out here in the mountains, this is the Ozark Mountains, so, you know, typically Oklahoma, flat, rolling plains, but what are you gonna do? Out here in the mountains, there's a particular area that's all mine to explore. Miles of government land surrounding some kind of research center. Scrubby deer trails meandering through scalp-prickling heat, tick-infested pine trees, and plenty of poison ivy. But every now and then, you'll find a cool hollow, caves gouged out of sweating granite. Plenty of microclimates are hiding out there in the rough country, off the horse trails and way away from where the idiot four-wheelers scream and churn mud. The worse it is out here, the better I like it. Some people get a thrill jumping from a plane. Out on the lake, kids will get those wakeboards going faster than I'm comfortable driving my Chevy half-ton. But that's not for me. I get my jollies in the wild, hunting for brand new insect species. I send my specimens to an old buddy at the university's entomology department, and then I play the waiting game. And sometimes I hit pay dirt. And then comes the best part. I get to name them. Gryllus oklahomus was my last find, a field cricket under a piece of rotten bark. Named that little dude in honor of my state, kept on looking for more. I find the fist-sized knot in the base of a dead pine tree, sort of a cubbyhole in the shape of a stop sign. The little hexagon has too many straight lines to be from nature, so I stoop down on creaking knees and take a look. The smell of burning wood wafts from the hole. Peering into this thing, I see it holds what looks like a plastic cube with an ember in it. And around the lip of the hexagonal hole, I see a brownish leg moving in precise jerks. It has a claw tip and it's busy, scratching. It's building something. Staring at it for a second, I realize it's making another little arm, a perfect copy of itself. What in the? I asked the empty woods. When I was a kid, I used to find fairy nests near the creek that ran behind my parents' place. Little shacks made of stick and moss and leaves, placed around a shade tree or in a sun-dappled clearing. In those days, kids roamed free, and I spent the whole summer hunting those fairy nests with a kind of magic in my heart. One night at dinner, I finally told my mama about what I'd found, and I will always remember the little smile she gave me because all of a sudden I knew exactly where those fairy houses came from. I knew, but I never did stop searching. Something tickles my hand and I give a yelp. In the dirt, I see a handful of marbles, only they're moving on lots of legs like pill bugs or roly-polies, as we once called them. The insects are trundling and falling over a piece of bark, peeling splinters from the wood, the size of thimbles. Each one has a raspy spot on its belly. They drag themselves over the wood and shred little pieces off. I watch one pick up a splinter with tiny mandibles and climb right into that hexagonal hole. He's tending the fire in there, keeping energy going to his little factory. Well, this is a whole new deal. I climb onto my knees and rifle through my field bag, pick up one of those little crawlers with tweezers and drop it into a glass specimen jar. I screw the lid on tight, and I wonder if it really needs those air holes. Can't say whether this little dude breathes or not. For the life of me, it looks like the bug is made out of some kind of metal. Government land, you know. It's hard to say what the scientists are doing in those fenced-off buildings. Only thing I know is that life likes to break free. Life likes to spread. Getting to my feet, I shade my eyes and look deeper into the woods. Now I notice a lot of the trees are dead, more than usual. And it may just be my old eyes, but I feel that there's a haze over everything, a thin smear of smoke from more of those miniature power plants, more smoldering factories out there in the sun-baked woods. I stand still, and the movement of the crawlers seeps into view, thousands of them, the color of dirt and leaves, dragging themselves like a living carpet over the ground, and the hair goes up on the backs of my arms. Somewhere out there, far off, I hear a tree splinter and crack, A shadow sweeps. I hear a hollow thump. The captured crawler is clinking against its jar, and I flinch a little bit. It's time to get back to the truck. I shrug my pack on tighter and turn around, and even though I start out walking, before long I'm running. In the truck, I don't take it easy on the accelerator. I'm on a dirt road for a few miles, meandering alongside razor wire fences. My tires chew the rocks loudly, and I can't see anything but my dust trail in the rear view, which is fine with me. When I finally stop at the sign to get onto paved road, it gets quiet except for my ragged breathing. I'm gripping the steering wheel, knuckles like mountain ridges. And then I hear the scratching sound from next to me. Fingers shaking, I swipe all the trash off the passenger seat, a curled yellow newspaper, a pair of work gloves, an Auto Trader magazine, waterfall onto the floorboard. And underneath, I find more of my friends with no names. Guess I must have left my window open while I was exploring the woods. The crawlers are busy making themselves right at home, pulling strips of fabric out of the seat back. They're carving out a neat hexagon shape. I take a deep breath and put my foot on the gas. A shaky smile has got onto my face. The garden of life, see? She's way beyond the ken of humankind. The textbooks say we barely scratched the surface. At the first exit, I head off toward the university. I'm pretty sure these bugs are made of metal, and I'm pretty sure that they were built and not born. But if nature doesn't care, then neither do I. I'm already thinking of names. The end.
All right, let's give a round of applause to Daniel H. Wilson. Brava. Daniel, before I ask my serious literary questions, I do have one primer. And instead of asking your astrological sign, I want to know which, and you mentioned this in your story, which do you say, pill bugs, roly-polies, or potato bugs?
Oh, I'm definitely a roly-poly person. I don't know. In northeastern Oklahoma, I think roly-poly would be the way it goes. But I'm sure that's one of those, you take the quiz online, they'll tell you where you're from. We drank pop, there's a lot of those.
I just was very curious because I haven't heard roly-polies in forever. I mean, I'm a potato bug.
Really?
Person. Yeah, and I was just kind of curious. But it's interesting how language, you can kind of narrow down the area based on kind of specific phrases or words. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to know more about kind of your experience as a roboticist, actually, to be quite honest, because it's been, I think, 10 years since your New York Times bestselling book, Robo-Apocalypse. And I'm curious to know kind of what are the themes that you think from the book that are still relevant in 2021?
Well, look, man, I grew up in Oklahoma. I thought that everybody was native, right? Like, I didn't think that had nothing to do with my writing or getting into writing. I was very into robots, right? And so I got this degree. I tried to write science fiction as a kid. No one cared, really. I got this degree in robotics because I'll take science, instead of science fiction, whatever. I'll take what I can get. I got to build robots for like 10 years, And then I found that people suddenly cared about my science fiction, right? Because they wanted to know what a real roboticist, thinks is possible. Robo-Apocalypse is all about the Osage Nation defending the world against a robot uprising. So, I mean, it's like, it's set, most of it is set in Oklahoma. It's like, that's the stuff I know about, right? And so that's what I write about. And, I wrote a sequel to that. I wrote Amped, which is about people that have, it's about what happens when disabled people leapfrog, or people with disabilities leapfrog people with abilities, and how that sort of, how that can make people's opinions curdle, and suddenly, they're trying to lock people down. A few of these have been bestsellers. The Crichton novel was a bestseller. So, I mean, I've been having fun writing novels. With Robo-Apocalypse specifically, honestly, so it got bought by Amblin, right? They were going to make a movie. They never did. I just got those rights renewed. We may be developing it as TV. Like, I just wanted to make it before it actually becomes like something that really happens in real life and becomes a historical like documentary. But in terms of the themes that are relevant, like, it's all about when you start taking pieces away from out of humanity, when do you end up with a machine? And when you start adding humanity to machines, when do you end up with a person? And just the line between what's natural, what's unnatural. It's about, God, the last 10 years have been pretty illuminating, right? In terms of building my cynicism toward humanity. But at the time, it's about how a catastrophe can bring out the best in people. Obviously that hasn't necessarily been the case lately, but in this world it has been. And you know, a lot of it was about the sovereignty of the tribes and about how we have small functioning civilizations, bubbles of civilization that have, you know, people don't know, there's police, there's hospitals, there's like, you know, if you go into the Osage Reservation, you go wherever, you'll find, my dad has rolls with Cherokee license plates, you know, like, and like people don't know that. And at the time I had written it after like Hurricane Katrina and like seeing how the federal government and state governments can fail you. And I thought, you know, if something big happens, I'm going to be looking for my tribe, right? I'm going to be looking for a smaller civilization that's going to be able to sustain itself and look after its people. And in fact, that's what I've, you know, kind of over time, I've sort of let that build more, and now I've acknowledged like that's a part of my writing, and like, and I've leaned into that more, and I've been really letting my novels grow, and also started to work in TV and features and stuff like that, and so it's been exciting to evolve over time.
Yeah, I just want to say I remember hearing about the film possible for Robo-Apocalypse, and I when I was excited to have you on board, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that, and just was through Google searching, and it's like, oh, it's a roller coaster. So
oh god,
it's been a ride for you.
And like I thought, you know, the rights keep getting renewed and all that, and I think right now, you know, it's got a chance to live on right now. Like, and you know, what are you going to do? It's Spielberg. So like, let's stay on the roller coaster, break my heart again. You know, at least it's exciting. At least it's been fun.
And then for those in our audience who don't know, by the way, you know, director Steven Spielberg, you may have heard of him and his work, picked up the rights, and was going to happen, wasn't going to, you know, it's just like a back and forth. So hang in there, buddy. Hang in there.
Yeah. Actually, I'm pretty excited. I've been working with a fellow named Sterling Harjo, who's also similar. He's from Oklahoma. He just finished Reservation Dogs, which is coming out like next week. It looks awesome. And he and I have been working together, and I'm pretty excited about, you know, just doing it myself. I mean, all due respect to Mr. Spielberg, but sometimes you got to get your own projects going and just do it yourself. So.
Well, I mean, and speaking of that, I actually kind of curious to know more. It sounds like you're, you know, part of what you're doing is like the do-it-yourself, right? And you're taking it in your own hands. And I'm really glad to hear about that new series coming out. And glad to hear that you know the people connected in that series too. And so I'm kind of curious, what's your perspective or thoughts on, at least I call it as an Indigenous Renaissance or Native Renaissance, we can call it whatever we want, but it's like there's just this uplift that's happening. And I'm wondering, is that something you're seeing on your end?
Yes. I mean, I'm like bearing witness to it right now. I mean, it's happening right now. People, I mean, they want those stories, and it's amazing how much IP out there exists that's popular, that's based on, you know, horrible stereotypes, and it just needs to be updated, and there's no other person to tell those stories, right? So I mean, if you have that experience, if you have that, you have a natural like ability to step in and fix some of this stuff. And so I've been and it's amazing how much of it has science fiction too. So I mean, look, I like write robots and Indians. Like, who would have ever thought that like anyone would particularly care about that? But I'm loving this because I'm having all these new opportunities to explore this IP and just be like, no. Like, we're going to fix this. We're going to get this right. And, you know, like with Reservation Dogs, like that was an all native cast, all native writers. And like, there's a lot of people working in Hollywood. There's a lot of opportunities right now for Indigenous directors, writers, like everything from top to bottom. And that perspective is something people are looking for. And it's just great that you know, that's a thing that people are actually paying attention now.
So yeah, and like, so what can you offer to the next generation who might be listening or who might be listening to this in the future? Like, what advice or wisdom can you share to continue this momentum to keep going as far as it can go?
I would say, I mean, this goes beyond just, you know, if you're an Indigenous author or whatever, I would just say, respect your background, respect your roots and where you come up, because like, I think it's very common. It's very easy to look around and be like, everybody is like me, you know, like we all have, there's nothing special about my experience. But as soon as you get out of your hometown, or as soon as you get a little farther along in life, you start to realize, wow, this is really unique, right? And it's hard for me to even find somebody that had the same background as me. And people value that, you know? So, I mean, that's something I tell young people, just because it took me so damn long to figure that out, that, you know, that there's value to that, and that, you know, your background matters and everything you've been through, even if you think it's super dull and normal, you know, that's not necessarily true. So, I mean, just respect the way you came up.
I love that. And it especially happens for anyone who writes memoir. You'll recognize that, oh, my life wasn't ordinary. Oh, I forgot about this. So just a little humor for the memoirists out there. So I just had one final question for you. And it's what I had asked Sloan earlier, but I'm just curious, yeah, what's next for you? Literary, media, film, or otherwise?
Yeah. You know, like I'm diving into television and features right now. But I have to say, one thing that's always been super important to me are the short stories. Like I got into science fiction because I love short stories. My dad took me to the used bookstore. I would buy, you know, all the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Astounding, Asimov, all that stuff. I mean, I came up on short stories. I love the mousetrap aspect of it. I love how you get a pinch of wonder. You know, I mean, what is Sloan, you said the season of ravening. Wow, like that's so good. Like what an awesome combination of words. It's like you said, DA, it just makes your brain go crazy. You're like, okay, I have so many ideas. And I continue to write short stories. And sometimes they turn into later a novel, or sometimes they turn into something I want to develop. I want to see it. I want to see what it would look like as a television show or whatever. Or somebody else reads it and they see something they can do with it. And so just continuing to explore all those worlds in your head, just to get a handle on it through short stories. I mean, that is always going to be part of what I do. And I'm on the books to write, I think 3 of them actually. So I gotta, before the end of the year, I got to get busy. But, you know, you can only mull for so long, right? But anyway, I would just say, yeah, what I'm doing the rest of the year is a lot of stuff, but always the basic foundation of exploring my own imagination through short stories.
I love that. That's great wisdom just to end off. So again, everyone, let's give Daniel H. Wilson a round of applause. That's just such an amazing wisdom. And then just again, Sloan, I think, you know, for our audience, what you just heard in just this conversation was just a testament of the importance and what's still inside of us as human beings, and that is sharing stories around a campfire. I mean, now we're doing it virtually. Who would have, our ancestors, who would have thought, if we just told them, here's what we're doing still, but it's just through computers. But, you know, the power of storytelling, and that's why we write stories, or that's why we read them, or sometimes both. So, well, you know, that just really concludes our evening. I just want to pick more brains, but our audience, please check out their work, support Native writers and artists by buying their books and following them on social media, and just doing what you can to keep us making more stories for all of you. So with all that said, I just again want to say thank you to Sloan and Daniel for sharing their work with us. And of course, thank you to Clarion West for your partnership with We the Indigenous Worlds and Myths. And actually, you know what? Before I close up and hand it back to Clarion West, we got time for just one question. I have a question coming up. Sorry, it's popping up. And that question is, drumroll. Sorry, y'all, on our end, we're getting the messages coming in. All right, so here's a question: are there specific Indigenous myths that inspired your stories? Ooh, let's do for both of you on that one, and then we'll officially end it. So Sloan, let's start with you, actually. Yeah, are there any specific Indigenous myths that inspired your stories?
I would say nothing specific. It's more like the non-structure of the stories inspires me, particularly Hawaiian mythology, because that's what I was most exposed to growing up. But there's a sort of like just like disregard for like resolution and like satisfying arcs. Like things will just happen. Like there's this one story that's just like a cannibal dog like ate a princess, and then he like became a shark, and then he became a bunch of bananas, and that's his story. And like I feel like there's this impression that a lot of like indigenous mythology has like lessons to impart, and a lot of them do, but a lot of them are also just kind of very absurd or just have like interesting concepts. And I think, I mean, just like we just like to chase down interesting or weird, you know, narrative concepts, our ancestors like to do that too, obviously. So that stuff is really inspiring to me.
I just love that. It reminds me of a myth from my tribe about a witch who eats children. That's the story. Lives in a cave. If there's a lesson, it's just don't get eaten by a witch.
Yeah.
Like,
she's like, I'm chill. I'm full and I'm chill.
It's like, I'm a witch and this is what I do. So we got to deal with it. We got to coexist in some way. So anyway, sorry, going off on the deep end. So thanks, Sloan. All right, Daniel, what about you? Yeah, any specific myths out there?
I don't usually incorporate like concrete myths into the story. I mean, I'm more like, I try to operate like if it was appropriate for a character, then I would do that. And I have done that before. And Robo-Genesis, I do that where I have a lot of Osage characters, but like, normally I'm operating a little farther downstream. So I try to like build science fictional elements into my stories that are sort of metaphors for stuff that's happening. So you might, for instance, I've got a short story called A History of Barbed Wire, where, a tribal coalition in northeastern Oklahoma has built a city and they've put a wall around it, and they have essentially Blade Runners who keep white people out. And a lot of those characters are sort of like carrying trauma, and they sort of acting on this kind of revenge fantasy that I've noticed people have. Like I did a radio interview, and it was about Robo-Apocalypse, and it was about how the native characters accept white people into their towns and help build this army to protect humanity. And people were calling in, and like there were multiple callers who were like, "That's bullshit. I would let them die," And I'm like, yeah, that anger is real, right? And so I decided to go explore. But that's like, there's lots of mythology, there's lots of culture, there's lots of shared trauma, and I'm just letting it play out in science fiction instead of invoking those stories more directly. So that's kind of where my sort of sandbox is at. It's a little downstream.
I love that. I love that you're implementing it, and it's up to your readers to react to however they want, right? So that's
well, I vibe with Sloane's answer on the world building, in that I do love structure, and I'm too sort of like meticulous to allow it to not tie up all the ends. But like, I don't think there's any such, it's terrible if you're world building for world building's sake, right? It needs to be echoing some central theme. What are you trying to say, right? And so if you got a keeper that's keeping track of somebody, then what is that? Is that about sisterhood? Is that about parenthood? It's like, if you can amplify those underlying themes through your science fiction, then it's just satisfying. Plus, it helps you figure out what to write, because if you got a blank page, you don't know what to do. You say, what am I trying to say? What's my theme? And you get back to that, it puts you back on your track, So
I love this, because it's not what you and Sloan are talking about. It not only is this a reading, it's also a craft talk and a TED talk. And so we're doing 3 for 1 for all of you, and it's for free. So more reason to support these writers. By again, following them on social media or definitely purchasing their books for sure. So thanks again, y'all. But yeah, I'll end it there. It's such a good high note, and we'll continue singing on our own tonight. But with all that said, I'm just going to pass it on to Jay for closing comments. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much to the readers. I owe you.
Thank you so much. And I want to reiterate that, get out there, support these authors, buy their books, etc. And thank you all to our listeners for being here tonight as well. So if you want to support this program and others like it, consider making a donation to Clarion West today. Links to support us are in the chat. You can also like and subscribe our YouTube channel. That really helps the more folks we get, so that we can do things like free closed captioning. And links to our online workshop page are also available in the chat. We will be announcing fall online classes very soon. Registration begins in August. So thanks once again to DA, to Daniel, to Sloan, and thank you to all of our Write-a-thon participants, donors, and everyone who has joined us here tonight. Stay safe and take care of each other. Good night.